applied universally, everywhere. All people, all cultures, all times, all places. If they're a human and they're acting, then we can apply praxeology to make sense of their actions. Make sense of what we see. But if you have these really precise abstractions, then you got to find really specific situations, and you probably won't find the exact situations and behaviors determined in the way that you have this equation set up. Another great article. I have a little snippet from Human Action for you to check out here, where Mises talks through the different ways that economists of his time were starting to use math and using math to a great degree, and he points out some of the fundamental problems there. Another article by Hans Hermann Hoppe talks about the progressions in using econometrics, and he talks about how whenever we use an equation to try to describe relate data that we've collected, it means that we're making this assumption of constancy. We're making this assumption that there's this relationship that we've discovered in the data in the past, and if we think that's meaningful to any extent at all, it means that we're making an assumption that there's some sort of constant relation in human action. And of course, he points out that that's false. We can't do that. However, importantly, I will try to get to this in the talk. He points out that there is a safe way to interpret econometric results. There is an innocuous interpretation of econometric results that allows us to do economic history, for example, even if we're not, taking to the full extent that we see mainstream economists interpreting regression results. In Statistics, Achilles' Heel of Government by Rothbard, he talks about some of the nefarious things that governments do with data and how they twist it. Of course, we're all familiar with this in our day and age of things being redefined, and so the things that Rothbard was talking about are alive and well today. A lot of the stuff that Gene Epstein was talking about last time would fit into the same category of sort of the nasty things that governments do with data to twist it to tell a particular story. And finally, I've got an example of good economic statistics being constructed by Austrians. So in this paper by Ray Rothbard and in other related papers that he wrote with Joseph Salerno, they constructed a better measure of the money supply than what you can get anywhere else. Like you can go to the Fred website and see all the different measures of the money supply, M1, M2, and 3. And in a series of papers by Rothbard and Salerno, including this one, they showed that all of those measures are wrong. Isn't that nice? We got all these measures, but none of them were quite right. And the reason why is because they were measuring, making their measurements based on something besides the definition of money, which is the final means of payment, the widely accepted exchange. Instead, they were using liquidity as a sliding scale to make it different measure. We'll get into this later on. I just wanted to give you this essential reading at the start. All of this discussion really hinges on the distinction between theory and history. And you don't really see this distinction in the other schools of thought, but Austrians are really good about knowing the boundaries of their science. Like we really understand what are the limits of what we can say, what's epistemologically valid. You don't see this discussion in other schools of thought, unfortunately. It seems like they just sort of skate by all of the methodological concerns and just get straight to the math without really thinking about what they're doing. Austrians are not that way. We start with the epistemology, like how do we know what we know, and then what does that mean? What can we say about human action, and so on and so forth. In economic theory, we use logical deduction. We apply logical deduction to some very safe, very universal axioms like humans action, define action, and we come up with claims like the law of diminishing marginal utility, the law of demand, or even way on down the road we could talk about the effects of inflation and increase the money supply. So all of this is a part of a huge edifice, a huge body of claims that are derived logically. The result of deriving those claims in that way is that we get universal claims. So since we're not making precisive abstractions, we're not making very specific assumptions about what motivates humans, it means that we get these universal claims. And like I said, the particulars of choice they're not relevant. So the law of diminishing marginal utility applies to somebody who's looking at an expanded set of apples, but also an expanded set of oranges. Like there's additional units of whatever good. It doesn't matter what the good is, then it means that the marginal utility decreases because the stock of the good is increasing. So we don't have to make particular statements about what the good is or what the motivations, the specific motivations of the actors are. So they might want to eat the apple because they're hungry. They might want to eat the apple for all sorts of reasons. I don't really know what other reasons you would want to eat apple besides you're just hungry. There's probably other examples I could have used there. But the point is we don't try to guess what people's specific motivations are, and they're not relevant either. It doesn't matter. The claims of economics are what they are, no matter what the motivations are. Very importantly, if we're using logical deduction and the logic is sound, the premises are true, and we come to the conclusion in a safe way, it means that the results are not falsifiable by observation. And this is a man, the mainstreamers, they really hate it when we say that. It's like, we have the truth, and there's nothing that we can see that would ever falsify like these truths that we know. It sounds like we're being copied. It sounds like we're super confident, and it's true. We are confident in those results, but it's not because we just have this self-inflated ego. It's because we see the way that the truths, the claims are derived. A very common analogy is with the Pythagorean theorem. So if we went out and measured the lengths of the sides of the right triangle, and we saw that the results contradict what we would expect by looking at the Pythagorean theorem, which relates the sides of the right triangle, if we got this one measurement that seemed to go against it, we would not toss out the Pythagorean theorem, because the Pythagorean theorem is put together in a logical, deductive way based on the definition of what a right triangle is and what distances are, how addition works, how squaring a term works, all those sorts of things. So it's just true by definition, right? It doesn't. If you go out and you measure a right triangle and you get something that's off, it means that your ruler is wrong, possibly, or maybe you're not measuring a right triangle, maybe you're measuring something else, or maybe it's something that looks like a right triangle but it's on a curved surface, some sort of weird example like that, where the assumptions aren't there in the real world. The same applies to the claims that we get in economics. The same thing if we go out in the real world and we see, oh, it looks like that person enjoyed the second apple way more than the first apple. Oh, I guess the law of diminishing marginal utility is just bumped. It's like we just got to toss it up. Like, no, it's like we understand the sorts of things that are true or that have to be held constant for these economic laws to hold in the real world. If we see change, if we see something that's different, it simply means that there's something else going on that we haven't taken into account in our observation. Similar to the right triangle example. There are no constant relationships in human action, which means that there's no constant mechanical, numerical, quantitative relationships in economic theory. We can never ever say that consumption of apples will increase by 3% every year or something like that. And the reason why is because there's no constants in the way we behave. There's no constants in the choices that we make. So we don't have constant relationships in economic theory. The goal of economic theory is also different than economic history, and also the goals of the way Austrians do economics and the way the mainstream does economics is very different, as we've seen. The goal, as you've seen this week, is we want to explain the real world. We want to analyze cause and effect. So humans have motivations, they act in a certain way, and we want to be able to come up with some true claims about why they behave, why they act, why they make the choices that they do, in a way that allows us to make sense of the real world. That's the idea. The purpose is not prediction per se, although good economics should allow us to at least make better predictions than if we didn't have economics. Some good examples of this edifice of economic theory that I'm talking about being constructed is in Human Action by Mises and Man, Economy, and State. Probably Man, Economy, and State by Rothbard is an even better example because it's very step by step. It's probably the best source that we have of seeing this edifice of economic theory being put together. Now, all of this contrasts with economic history. In economic history, we take what we know from economic theory and we apply it to the past. And this doesn't have to be 100 years ago. This could be 5 minutes ago. It could be 1 minute ago. So if we're ever trying to make sense of what we observed, and if we're observing something, it means it's necessarily in the past. It means that we're doing history and not theory. It's just the application of theory to the past. When we're doing history, we can identify some particulars. Some of this might be some speculation, like there might be people who have two different perspectives on the same event happening, so they'll see different things, and so there's a little bit more speculation about it. Motivations can be guessed. We're all human, so we understand what it means to be incentivized to do something. For example, like if we see somebody going to school to learn skills so that they can get a promotion at their job, we can guess. Like we can guess all those motivations. All we see is the person signing up for school, and they either get or they don't get the promotion that they were seeking, right? But we only see that, and all of the extra stuff is just us trying to guess what their motivations are. Those could be really safe assumptions, or it could be a lot of guesswork involved, just depending. And like I said, it's all open to interpretation. We don't get the epistemologically rock solid claims when we're doing history. All we get is, if we're going beyond just a basic description of what is observed, it means that we're doing some guesswork, we're doing some speculation. Some great examples of this, of economic history, is America's Great Depression by Rothbard. I love that book. You should definitely read it. Every Austrian student should read that book, because it starts off with theory and then applies that theory to the past. Great way. And also, another good example is Robert Higgs' Crisis in Leviathan. He's doing economic history. Great book. And here you'll notice in both America's Great Depression and in Crisis in Leviathan, they look at numbers. They use statistics, right? And it's totally safe. They're not using statistics to try to falsify economic theory. They're using statistics to make sense of the past, in conjunction with a good knowledge of economic theory, to make claims about why the government grows the way that it grows, or why there was a big bust in 1929. To give you a picture visually of the difference between Austrian economics and the mainstream, it's like these are random draws. I'm not lying. They're true random draws from the Economy and State, and then just a top mainstream journal, AER. And on the left, there's a great example of Rothbard using this deductive method to come up with a fresh point. In this case, it's a footnote on page 116, where he's talking about what if the goods are discrete and we can't get an exact equilibrium? Like, what if the market can't clear exactly because of the way the preferences of the suppliers and the demanders are set up, and the goods are discrete, so we can't get that exact intersection? And he just talks through, well, this would have to be the case. They would have to just get as close as they can, right? Very, very simple deduction here. So we don't get an exact equilibrium, but they get close to my bounce back and forth. But compared just visually what that looks like to the mainstream, where it's another language, right? it's these mathematical equations with a bunch of symbols, and hopefully the equations mean something to the authors. Probably doesn't mean much to anybody else, right? Everybody else just sort of nods their head, and they're going through the papers and reacting to conferences. Allow me a quick story. I was at a paper presentation in Auburn where I studied, and it was a macroeconomist paper. And one of the microeconomists that specializes in labor, they're all silos: health economists, consumer economists, and labor economists. This guy specializes in labor economists. He leaned over to me and he said, "I have no idea what's going on." So there's this two mainstream economists, the macroeconomist and the micro guy, and they're just they're talking straight past each other. And so the feeling that you get by looking at the stuff on the right is similar to what even mainstream economists feel when they're saying these papers. But I just wanted you to see visually, what does the mainstream look like? Rothbard has a great preface to a book by Mises called Theory and History, more underrated books by Mises. It's a great book. Here, Rothbard is talking about the subject of economics as humans, and what that means for how we do economics. How do we go about doing social science with what we know about how humans are different from inanimate objects? Therefore, atoms and stones can be investigated, their courses charted, and their paths plotted and predicted, at least in principle, to the minutest quantitative detail. People cannot. Everyday people learn, adopt new values and goals, and change their minds. People cannot be slotted and predicted as can objects without minds or without the capacity to learn and choose. So, an example that I like to use in class is dropping a tennis ball. We can hold the tennis ball and drop it, and we can do this a million times. It takes a long time to do that, but you could drop the tennis ball a million times, and you could time it, you can make observations, and you would come up with this conclusion that the tennis ball falls. You might come up with the law of gravity by doing this over and over and over again. So you have this explanation for the behavior of the tennis ball by dropping it a million times. It would be wholly inappropriate, incorrect, nonsensical to say the tennis ball likes the ground, right? Or that the tennis ball likes to bounce, or the preference of the tennis ball is to fall towards the ground, right? It's a nonsense statement, and the reason why is because we know the tennis ball does not have a human mind. However, when we're talking about the end of this lecture, when everybody stands up and gives me a standing ovation because the talk was so great, then we would use that sort of language, like we would refer to your motivations and values and preferences and these sorts of things. So the way that we should treat humans is not the way that we should treat inanimate objects. It's a very simple conclusion. However, if you look at the way mainstream economics is done, we're treating humans like objects. We're treating humans like these bodies that have mechanical relationships with their environments. Great. Here's another one. The use of statistics and quantitative data when trying to ask this fact is talking about the fact that it's impossible to test in theory. But their seeming precision is only grounded on historical events that are not homogeneous in any sense. Each historical event is a complex, unique resultant of many causal factors. Since it is unique, it cannot be used for a positivistic test. And since it is unique, it cannot be combined with other events in the form of statistical correlations to achieve any meaningful result. So we might try to do the same thing that we did with the tennis ball, dropping the tennis ball and just repeating observations to come up with a conclusion about how tennis balls behave when they're dropped. We might try to do that same sort of method with humans and just watch people go into a restaurant, right? And we see people go into the restaurant over and over again. Right? Even the same people come in over the same person, the same restaurant. that we would never ever be able to come up with a constant relationship, right? We would never be able to say that people always do this or people are even likely to do this. We might come up with probabilities, but the point is that those probabilities could change with additional observations. We might see people start buying different dishes. They sit at different tables, and the reason why is because humans are not tennis balls. Humans are, we make choices, even if we're in very similar situations, we can behave, we can act, choose in totally different ways. So humans are different, so we can't use that method to study human action. That's the point. So why are they obsessed with data? So I'm going to try to get into the statistics part here. So why is it that the mainstream, they love their statistics? And so here I just have a very quick overview of the way mainstream microeconomics or neoclassical economics is set up. Here, consumers, they have a utility function, and with that utility function, which is based on consuming different bundles of goods, you can map out indifference curves where they would have the same level of utility by consuming the different quantities of the good. So that's what those curved lines are. Those are the indifference curves. And you see, like right off the bat, just by drawing the curve, either the utility function or the indifference curve, you'll notice that they've already made a bad assumption. And that bad assumption is that the goods that are consumed by people are continuous. We don't consume continuously. There are no consumers.
So exactly that vehicle dying up your vehicle.
Anywhere, just because of, like, you go down to the atom, the molecule, right? So there are no continuous goods. Like you never go up to an ice cream shop and they'll say you can buy different numbers of scoops, and there's not the possibility for you to say I would like 1.213692.5, and you just